Custody mediation services. Are they good, bad, or just ugly? Hi everyone. Today I wanted to talk about services that are available in some areas to help with determining custody. Not all states offer these services, but where I am from, we have something called a CCES process. It stands for Court Conciliation and Evaluation Service. Today we're going to break it all down, the purpose of the CCES and similar programs, what happens during the process, the cost, and what you can expect. If you or someone was facing a custody evaluation, this video is a must-watch. So let's dive in. So what is CCES? CCES is a process used in custody disputes in my area to help the court determine the best custody arrangement for the child. It's designed to help parents create a parenting plan that works for both parties, while also ensuring that the child's best interests remain top priority. This isn't just about deciding who gets custody. It's about creating a cooperative and low-conflict co-parenting environment that benefits the child. That being said, my husband and I both took advantage of this process and both had widely different experiences. And although both ended up producing custody agreements, the written evaluations were shocking, and in my husband's case, completely inappropriate. I'll give you some examples of that later on. Custody battles can be messy. Parents don't always see eye to eye, and sometimes emotions run high. Actually, all of the time emotions run high with divorces. The CCES process is meant to reduce conflict by encouraging parents to work together rather than fight against each other. It helps the judge make an informed decision about custody by gathering personal insights on the family dynamic. The goal, and I'll explain later why I used air quotes, is a stable, supportive, and loving environment for the child, with both parents actively involved. The reality of the situation is that it all depends on who your evaluator is, what their personal biases are. In my opinion, the evaluations are not as thorough as they should be. You only meet a few times, so there are only so many issues that you can cover. And the situation doesn't always allow for the kids to be themselves, and there's no home visit. All right, so now let's talk about what actually happens during a CCES process. So the process takes 6 to 8 weeks, and it usually involves several steps. The first step would be individual parent interviews. So each parent will get to meet with the evaluator separately to discuss their parenting concerns, their relationship with the child or children, and their preferred custody agreement. To be honest, I don't recall much of a discussion on what I wanted for custody. Most of the interviews were all about our dysfunctional relationship, what my concerns were about him and his ability to care for the children, and our marriage history. Step 2 is the child interviews and observations. So the counselor will also meet with the children to understand their perspective. If the child is younger, observations may be done instead of an interview. So my children were so young that there wasn't much of an interview. I believe my oldest, who was only about 4 at the time, did speak with him, but my 3.5-year-old did not. In addition, they meet with each parent individually along with the kids so that they can observe the child's interactions with the parent. This ended up being very important in my situation because the evaluator got to see that my ex-husband was alone with the kids, how he spoke to them and interacted with them and things like that, and that ended up being very important. The third step is a joint parent session. At some point, both parents may have a session together to discuss the co-parenting strategies and to try to reach an agreement on custody. My ex and I are incapable of having a discussion. It just ends up being a screaming match. So these interviews were interesting, to say the least. The fourth step are any additional evaluations if they're needed. Sometimes the counselors may meet with other key people in the child's life, such as step-parents, grandparents, teachers, or even boyfriends and girlfriends, to get a fuller picture of the family dynamic. In my case, the evaluator met with my current husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, and also with my ex's girlfriend. This was most likely because each of us was coexisting or cohabitating at the time with the kids and these other people. So these people were around on a daily basis. The last step is the final report. Once all the evaluations are complete, the counselor will submit a written report to the court with recommendations for custody or visitation. Earlier, I mentioned what the goal of the process was and said that I would explain why I did that in air quotes. The reason is because it really is important as to who performs the evaluation. So who is the evaluator? What is their personality? What are their biases? Those things are extremely important, and I'll tell you why. As an example, so my current husband was a stay-at-home dad up until his wife met someone and decided she wanted a divorce. But before she informed him that she wanted a divorce, she suddenly decided that their son should be in daycare. And since dad wouldn't need to be a stay-at-home dad anymore, he got a job. At the time, my husband didn't realize what she was up to. So she put their son in daycare and she had to get a job. What did those two things accomplish? Well, number one, because he now had a job and wasn't a stay-at-home dad, he was less likely to get more custody. So this way, if he had a job and she had a job and the child was in daycare, then now the custody split should probably be closer to 50-50. The other reason for having dad get a job is so that she didn't have to pay him spousal support, because if he was working, she wouldn't have to pay him as much. So how did this affect the custody evaluation? Well, unfortunately, the job that my husband got at the time wasn't meant to support him and a child. It was meant to be their family's fun money, because that's how his wife always referred to any jobs that he had or any income he brought in. That money was used as their fun money, and her money was used to pay all of the bills. So he wasn't concerned about getting a job that would support him and a child. He was basically getting a job to help support their extracurricular activities. And she certainly wasn't going to tell him, sure, he gets a job that pays him a lot of money so he can support himself and a child, because she didn't want him knowing she was filing for divorce. So then, just prior to the start of the evaluation, he had to move in with me because he couldn't afford their house, because again, she had moved out and moved in with her boyfriend. He couldn't afford the mortgage because he wasn't making enough money at his job. And so he had to relinquish ownership of the home. So he ended up moving in with me. So we went through the entire process of the CCES evaluation for the 6 to 8 weeks. Everyone was interviewed, and the evaluator was taking way longer than normal to get the report done. And by way longer, I mean taking months instead of weeks. So at one point, we contacted him to find out where the report was. And he said that he had been convalescing after having had surgery and was in a lot of pain and hadn't gotten around to it yet. So I have several issues with that. So number one, people are waiting on these reports. And in some cases, the lack of a secure or reasonable custody agreement is causing undue harm to the children. And I just felt that this person was being awful cavalier with other people's lives. My other concern was that he was being medicated. So was this really the best time for him to be writing up such a sensitive report about custody of a child? In any event, several months later, we got the report. The one thing to know about this process, and I'm not sure if this is the way it is in every state, but we were not allowed to have a copy of the report. We had to go to the lawyer's office to read it one time. So fortunately, I have a really good memory when it comes to things that I read that are very important, and this certainly was. So one thing that really stuck out was something the person or this evaluator said about the fact that if it had not been for the financial support that I was giving to my now husband, he would not have gotten 50% custody, because the evaluator felt that he would not have financially been able to care for the child. I feel that that is way out of line. My husband, as I said, got that job not knowing that his wife was planning to divorce him. And her opinion of his income was that it was the fun money. In addition, my husband was entitled to child support, and he also would have been entitled to spousal support had he not been working with me or living with me. So he would have had plenty of money to care for their son. And in my opinion, it was not the evaluator's purpose to look at the finances of each parent. It was to address the emotional and psychological aspects of their dynamic and come up with a custody and parenting plan that was best for their son. The scary thing is that these reports are very influential. While the judge has the final say, the CCES recommendations carry a lot of weight in court. My lawyer at the time told me that most of the judges in my area just automatically go with what is in the CCES recommendation, that they rarely deviate from it unless something is brought up in court that gives them pause. And I was strongly cautioned against trying to argue against it with the judge because a spiteful judge can always take custody away. And in our case, the judge did just go with the CCES evaluation. So our custody ended up being exactly what our evaluator had suggested. So now let's talk about cost. Because let's be honest, legal processes aren't cheap. For one child, the minimum fee is $910 per parent. If there are multiple children or additional sessions are needed, it can cost up to $100 per session. However, if you can't afford it, you might qualify for financial assistance. In my county, they offer subsidies based on federal poverty guidelines. So make sure that you ask about money concerns that you have and if this process might be something that you could get financial assistance with. Since the CCES report plays a big role in the court's custody decision, you want to be prepared. So here are some tips to help and some caveats that I'll add based on my own experience. Be honest and cooperative. I'll add within reason. And always remember the evaluator's purpose is to evaluate you. So try not to get too chatty or let your guard down too much. They are not your personal therapist, although most of them are psychologists or therapists of some sort. But don't unload all of your baggage on them and don't try to play the sympathy card thinking that you'll get more custody. It could end up backfiring and coming off as you being unstable. Stay focused on the child's needs. This isn't about proving you're the better parent. It's about what's best for the child. You certainly want to be honest about your concerns that you have about your ex and any issues that you think maybe put the kids at risk of harm or red flags that your ex might have. But you need to phrase it properly. Don't point fingers and get all animated and angry. Approach it as an advocate for your kids. What is it about the other parent's behavior or beliefs that you think are not healthy for the kids? And then give examples of what you do in the same situation that is healthier. Avoid speaking negatively about your ex. Obviously, you don't want to lie or hide anything. So if you have real concerns about your ex being around the kids or caring for them, then you need to express that. And hopefully the evaluator does their job and picks up on these things during your ex's interview or the interview with the kids. But don't make things up that you can't substantiate with audio, video, emails, texts, or witness testimony, because it'll only hurt you. Bring any relevant documents. If you have records of past agreements, schedules, or concerns, bring them to the evaluation. This can be very important. In my husband's case, he was the primary caregiver, as I said. He was a stay-at-home dad. His ex-wife had a career that was very important to her, so he stayed home with their son for the first 3.5 years prior to the divorce. She worked very long hours, and then for a period of 5 or 6 months, she was living in another state, working before they were able to find a house and move the family. My husband took care of their son in every way for those 3.5 years. He cared for him every day, took him to the doctors, made sure that he stayed active and did a lot of trips to different parks and beaches, etc. And after his wife moved to the other state, he drove their son to see her as often as he could so that she could see their son. So the manipulation didn't end with just his ex-wife having him get a job and putting the child in daycare so that she could avoid him getting more custody and having to pay him spousal support. But during their evaluation, she tried to convince the evaluator that she was fully and completely involved in their son's life. And she tried to say that she took him to the doctor's appointment. It's not my husband. She really tried to downplay the fact that he was the primary caregiver and not her. So it became important for us to show proof that he was the primary caregiver, and that included getting notes from the doctor's appointments showing who took him, copies of her pay stubs that showed the high number of hours that she worked, which precluded her from having much involvement as she claimed that she had. We even had copies of the daycare drop-off and pickup sheets. And why did we have those? Because when they were still living together, she was having her boyfriend, who the daycare thought was her brother, pick up almost daily. This was because my husband's work hours kept him at work until after daycare was closed. So she was trying to claim that she was taking care of him and downplaying my husband's role, but in reality, she never took care of him on her own. She always had someone else doing it. It was either my husband, and after my husband left, it was her boyfriend. So documentation can be very important. Many states have programs similar to CCES to assist in resolving child and custody disputes. While the names and specific procedures of these programs vary, their common goal is to prioritize the child's best interest by facilitating cooperation between parents and providing the court with informed recommendations. So be sure to check in your area to see if any of these programs are available to you. Remember, this process is there to help families, but people can be manipulated. So you need to make sure that you are thorough in your details and you keep your composure. I hope you found this video useful. Please check out my other videos and be sure to sign up to get a free copy of my journal that can help you stay organized during this time. Thank you so much.